Hey, how's it going and welcome to another video. I hope you're having a good Fire Emblem November. So, for those of you who don't know, Path of Radiance currently stands as my favorite Fire Emblem game and one of my favorite games in general. I found myself falling in love with the characters, setting, and the themes it presented, and I'll always remember finishing it just a few hours after the year turned from 2018 to 2019. It was a good way to start the year and it really reinvigorated my passion for the series. Either way, the game ended up introducing me to some of my all-time favorites like Soren, Nysala, and of course Jill, who's probably my favorite Fire Emblem girl. She stands out as one of the best characters from the game and provides some of the most interesting examples of the game's themes in action, and I would even say has one of the best character journeys in the entire series. Jill is first introduced in Chapter 11, and it fits perfectly that one of the game's most memorable chapters also gives us our first look at one of the most memorable characters. She appears alongside Har, another one of my favorites, as a member of the Dayan Draco Knights. This group of Wyvern riders blocks off Ike's gang from escaping, and that's about all they're ordered to do. Just float there. After Har gives the order to withdraw, Jill protests, stating she has to return to her father with at least something to prove herself, and thus she chases down Ike's ship in pursuit of glory. Before I continue, it's important to elaborate on one of Path of Radiance's major themes, racism. In the land of Tellius, there exist two species, the humans known as the Bjork, and the animal people known as the Lagoos. Tensions between these two races run deep, as there's a long history of misunderstanding, war, slavery, and segregation in the world. Some nations are better than others, but Jill's home country of Dayan is by far the worst. The military regularly participates in what they call subhuman hunts, and from a young age, children are taught that Lagoos are little more than vile beasts. Jill's hatred of Lagoos runs so deeply that when Ike's group, who's supposed to be her enemy mind you, are seen under attack from several Crow Lagoos, she has no choice but to join up with what she considers to be the lesser of two evils. The first interaction between her and Ike is golden, with Jill giving such quotes as "Bleed the half-breed!" She also comes with a Lagoos Guard item, which halves all damage taken from Lagoos enemies, and it's a really nice little way of expressing through gameplay how much she detests the other species. It's only after witnessing the kindness of the Dragon Prince Kurth Naga, who provides the crew with supplies and is generally just delightful, that she starts to have a change of heart. However, it's not immediate and starts off as more confusion than anything. From her perspective, all Lagoos are little more than monsters. Savage beasts who can't possibly understand something like charity. So the revelation that they're more like humans than she expected flips her world upside down. Rather than taking leave, she decides to stick around with Ike's crew a bit longer. Jill has two of the best supports in the entire game, and one of them is with the Lagoos Lethe. Lethe is essentially Jill, but in reverse, as she is incredibly racist against Bjork and initially ferociously opposed to the idea of cooperating with them. The support begins with Jill making some small talk and simply asking why the Lagoos don't use weapons, and Lethe replies that they just don't need them. Weapons are a creation of the humans for fighting against the superior bodies of the Lagoos. She then eases into the big question. Why do Lagoos hate Bjork so much? Lethe naturally deflects the question back onto her, and the only answer Jill can really provide is because Lagoos are the enemy. There's no greater justification as to why, and it's a great example of just how indoctrinated she really is. In the B support, she begins to break through some of this brainwashing and starts wondering why things are the way they are. Lethe explains some of the history of the land. Lagoos and Bjork once lived in relative peace until the senators of Benyon started a civil war, and ultimately turned the Lagoos into slaves. Those Lagoos who managed to escape now occupy the nations to the south and west as far away from the Bjork as possible, and it really goes to show the duality of these two characters. Whereas Jill is racist because she is uneducated, Lethe on the other hand is racist because she is educated. The two characters are ultimately guilty of the same thing, however, and that's judging groups rather than individuals. The support basically ends with Lethe saying that Jill should stop and really think about what she's told her. Throughout her time in Benyon, Jill slowly but surely changes, as she witnesses Lagoos being trafficked, forced into hiding in the remote desert, and ultimately goes on a rescue mission to save the Heron Prince Racen. This is all done while fighting alongside allies who were once her enemies, with several of them being the Lagoos she once despised so much. And for the first time in her life, Jill fights not for a nation, but simply what she believes is right. Unfortunately for Jill, the next battle she's going to have to fight is against her own country, as well as her own father. As we see in her supports with Mist, it's really not all rainbows and ice cream being a part of Ike's group, as despite fully accepting her into their ranks, she still feels like an outsider. She refuses to eat with them, saying it would ruin the meal for others, and prefers to be by her lonesome. The kind-hearted Mist, however, is having none of that and brings her food. It's a really sweet support for both characters, with Jill slowly starting to open up on a personal level with Mist. But it's hard for her to overcome the reality that she's a soldier of Dayan, one of the enemy. But Mist just doesn't care, since Jill is a person first and a part of Dayan second. Another showing of the idea that people should be judged for who they are and not where they're from. In the final rank of their support, Jill finally breaks down and cries about the past, and how such a core part of her belief system was entirely wrong. Lagoos aren't monsters, they're people just like her, and her upbringing has basically been a lie. She questions why her father would lie to her, why things ended up this way, and afterwards she promises to follow her own path and do what's right. It's a really beautiful and sweet support between these two characters who really just needed somebody to lean on and confide in. As we'll see later on, completing this support actually has a major impact on the rest of Jill's story. In Dayan, you finally meet Jill's father, General Shahar, who really does impress me by how much you learn about and ultimately sympathize with this character who's only around for one chapter. Shahar is a migrant who, along with Har, left Benyon to become part of the Dayan military, and surprisingly has no real hatred of Lagoos at all. In order to survive and become integrated with Dayan culture, he was forced to participate in Lagoos hunts, and had no other option but to teach his daughter to think the same way. Dayan is a brutal monarchy, and as Har explains, those who defy the crown have their entire families killed. You gotta consider the mental strain this must have put on Shahar, who really only had one of two options for raising his daughter. Teach her to hate the Lagoos and serve as a soldier for the nation, or tell her the truth and put her at risk of being killed or possibly something worse. There's really no good choice to be found in this situation, and he simply picked what he thought would be the least bad option. The battle against Shahar is one of the most sad parts of Path of Radiance, and he's probably the least evil member of the Dayan military. He really is just a guy stuck in a shitty situation. This is a major turning point in Jill's character, since now it's no longer about fighting Dayan, it's about defeating her own father. It also puts Jill in what is arguably the most difficult situation to be in for the entire army. Should she fight for her friends and morals, or should she fight for her homeland and her family? It's also possible for Jill to defect to the enemy side if she talks to her dad, which is the first instance of something like this occurring in any Fire Emblem game. It's a very unique honor and one I'm glad Jill received, since it goes to show no matter how strong the bond between her and the mercenaries are, Shahar is still her father. On the flip side, however, it's possible to talk to Shahar and have her not leave, if she has an A rank with Mist. Rather than joining up with her father, she'll state that there are people in the army she wants to protect, and it's an answer that Shahar is completely satisfied with. It's an excellent part of the game with a lot of variance in terms of what can ultimately happen. But for Shahar, the most important thing is that his beloved daughter is safe and happy. After this, her support with Lethe can conclude, and it's initiated by Lethe asking why on earth she chose a group of mercenaries over her own father. Jill explains that fighting alongside Ike and the gang is the first time she's felt like she's truly doing what's right, and not taking orders from her father or a nation. This display of inner strength moves Lethe, who offers to shake Jill's hand as a sign of friendship. It's a really touching scene watching as these two characters who were initially full of spite realize they're really not all that different. They reach an understanding of each other, with Jill learning the true history of Tellius, and Lethe realizing the lengths Jill has gone to in pursuit of her own morals, and it stands out as one of the best relationships in the entire game. Her role in the story isn't over yet, however, as she reunites with her former commander, the Wyvern Rider Har. Har, having no real loyalty to Dayan and being more concerned about keeping Jill safe, decides to just go rogue and join up with Ike's gang. Jill and Har have a delightful relationship. It's almost akin to like a big brother and a little sister, and it's clear to see how much they care about each other. Their support mainly revolves around the now deceased Shahar and the impact he left on both of them. According to the duo, the only time Har acted like a professional was when he was around, and the only time Jill could loosen up was when her dad was there. They also discussed their plans for after the war, with them both agreeing that they'll return to Dayan and start a Wyvern courier service. It's by no means the deepest or most enlightening support, but it's nonetheless enjoyable and feels very natural. They're characters with a great chemistry and are ultimately motivated by the same driving force, to do what they think is right. It's possible to have Jill engage the main antagonist, the Mad King of Dayan, Ajnard. She asks why her father, General Shahar, had to die, to which Ajnard replies he doesn't even remember a general with that name. Just imagine spending your entire life under the authority of this man, who forced you to slaughter and hate Laguz, who drove you to abandon your homeland, an action which eventually led to the death of her own father. Then you face this man, determined to find answers, and he has no idea what you're talking about. Jill absolutely snaps, and although she ultimately can't do anything to harm him, it's nonetheless a cathartic moment and a standout for Jill's character. Thus, her journey in Path of Radiance ends. Jill thanks Ike for showing her the error of her ways and makes her return to Dayan. It's a beautiful end to the first half of her story. But this wouldn't be the end for Jill, as she reappears in the sequel game, Radiant Dawn. Jill makes her first appearance as a member of a Dayan force fighting against the Benyan occupation of her homeland, and ultimately joins up with Micaiah and the Dawn Brigade. Jill doesn't have nearly as prominent of a role in this game, but the real conflict of her character comes around in the third act. Dayan is once again thrust in a war against the armies of Crimea and the Laguz Alliance, and this time former allies are forced to fight one another. In the previous game, the major conflict she faced was choosing between what she thinks is right with her friends, or fighting for family and homeland. In Radiant Dawn, this conflict is pushed to another level, since she has friends on both sides of the battle. Neither side is a perfect option, and no matter what, she's going to end up abandoning certain people. Ironically, all those years later, Jill basically ended up in the same situation as her dad. If she stays with Dayan, she decides to ignore her conscience and fight for a nation rather than herself. The bulk of her dialogue in this game comes from her numerous pre-battle quotes, and in some instances, it's possible to recruit her to the side of the Laguz Alliance. If spoken to by Har, he asks what's more important, Dayan or what she feels is right. He also gives one of my favorite quotes from the game. "Come with me, Jill. We both know that we should follow our hearts, even if it makes us traitors. We know that better than anyone. For the sake of your father, live your life without shame." Radiant Dawn has an absolute wealth of battle quotes when she fights characters like Ike, Lethe, Mist, and many more, and if I simply read them all out to you, we'd be here all day. But I'd like to summarize Jill's character with this quote of hers from Radiant Dawn. "I fight on the side of my conscience, and have yet to regret my battles." It serves as the ultimate reflection of Jill's character and the message of following your own conscience above anything else. In this way, Jill has truly surpassed her father, the man who lived his life ignoring his own moral compass. Unlike Shahar, Jill broke free, trusted her heart, and fought for what she thought was right. Her story ultimately concludes when she returns to Dayan after the events of Radiant Dawn and rules over the land her father once kept safe. If she had an A support with Har, the two end up getting married. Jill is a character that really stands out to me since her journey throughout both games is a constantly evolving one, and her perspective on races, nations, and people slowly change. Too often in Fire Emblem, characters will join your group and kinda just be along for the ride, whereas Jill's story takes twists and turns all the way through. From the moment you see her to the very final battle, there's something new happening with her, including the possibility of her just straight up leaving your army. The change Jill makes throughout Path of Radiance stands as one of the most compelling single character stories in the series, and she'd honestly be worthy of being a protagonist in her own right. Then in Radiant Dawn, she keeps this forward momentum as she's faced with a new crisis of character, and grows stronger for it. Jill's a great character, and one I simply can't imagine Tellius without. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.